Baked Bros presents the Know Your Dose podcast. Join hosts Nadeem Alhassan and Derek Espinosa as they turn the soil on the cannabis industry. With over 10 years of combined industry experience, these two experts will deliver your dose of cannabis, psychedelics, and personal development. Follow on their journey as they aim to destigmatize cannabis, combat the abuse of pharmaceuticals, and implement their altruistic approach into the budding cannabis industry.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Know Your Dose podcast. Derek and I talk about if free will is an illusion, how free will, personal responsibility, and cannabis intersect. We also introduce a new segment of the podcast in the beginning where we talk about the latest and greatest news that's going on in the cannabis industry and anything related to or decriminalization of psychedelics or anything fun and fascinating. Enjoy the show, everyone. Yo, what's up, Dr. Dre? How you doing?
Hey, what's going on, man? How's your day going?
It is going great, man. Happy Monday. It's another great weekend, and it was my birthday weekend, so that was really fun. A lot of good food, good friends, so I'm thankful for that. Something that I want to introduce to the podcast is a new section to the podcast, and right, that's fun, right? New things are fun. They can be, and we are a cannabis podcast, and yes, we do talk about cannabis in nearly every single episode, but we figured when we were last discussing that our audience probably wants to know like the latest and greatest with what's going on in the cannabis industry when it comes to laws, regulations, new discoveries. And so let's talk about one of the latest discoveries by Dr. Mechoulam in terms of some of the cannabinoids that number one, for what he's responsible for discovering, and then what he most recently discovered and who he is.
Yeah, so Dr. Mechoulam is the father of cannabis research. He is the gentleman who we can thank for the discovery of CBD and THC. And this was back in the 60s, so he really pioneered this field. Today, he is 88 years old and still making discoveries. And I don't know about you, but I hope to be, kicking ass at 88 like he is. I think that's pretty awesome.
Making discoveries at almost 90 years old. That's tremendous.
So what this guy did essentially was there is this, he calls it the mysterious world of compounds that are the cannabinoid acids. And these are compounds that are found naturally in the plant, but they're not very stable. And so in terms of their like pharmaceutical drug development or utilization in medical cannabis, they're pretty much non-existent because they don't stay stable for very long. They break down, they degrade, and they're not usable. So what he did was he took one of these compounds, which is a derivative of CBD, cannabidiol acid, and was able to, and I'm not going to pretend to know exactly how this process works, but he used a process called esterification, which made the compound more stable. And essentially, they're thinking that these compounds, these acid compounds, are more potent than CBD or THC. And in the early research, it's actually been found to be particularly useful for suppressing anxiety and nausea. And for me, this is a great example of how much in the cannabis industry and medical cannabis specifically is in its infancy.
Definitely.
There's so much room for innovation, right? And right now we're stuck in this model where we're using, this is kind of industry-wide, right? Where we favor nature versus synthetic.
Right.
But that might not be the best way to go, right? Like there's tons of innovation that's taken place in the pharmaceutical industry that has saved millions of lives.
Back up real quick on that real quick. In terms of we favor nature over synthetic, because I think that's you kind of brushed over that really lightly, but it's a good point on what you're saying, and we've discussed this offline, and so let's talk about that a little bit, and then get back into this in terms of what you mean by that.
Cool. So typically, and I am somebody, and if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you've definitely heard me espouse these ideas. But the fact that what is natural is good and what is not natural is bad. And so within the cannabis industry, the way that plays out is, cannabinoids that are naturally derived, THC, CBD, are preferable to cannabinoids that are not natural, such as Marinol, something that was created in a lab, right? And so there's this idea that something that is natural, something that comes from nature is inherently good. Means that no matter what it is, that there's just this good quality about it. And that anything that is created in a lab that is quote unquote not natural is inherently bad. We should look at it dubiously. And the point that I'm making is that I think that distinction doesn't necessarily hold up. Like, just because something is natural does not mean it's inherently good or bad. It just is what it is, right? And based on its merits, based on its ability to do something, that's how we should categorize it, right? It's just like, go ahead.
So it seems you're about to give an example. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when you're looking at a person, right? You can draw distinctions. You can put people in certain boxes, right? At a first glance, we call that a prejudice, right? Or just at a first glance, I look at you. Like, let's say you have tattoos. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I could look at you and I could make a distinction and say what is natural is good. So therefore, if you have tattoos, you must be a bad person because that's not natural, right?
Right.
And that strips all the meaning away from who you actually are on the inside, what you do in society. And so by eliminating those, reference points, these distinctions between good and evil, natural versus unnatural, I just eliminate all that together. But what I'm saying is we should judge these things based on their merit, based on their value, rather than what's on the surface. So
I think that was very well said right there.
Thank you, sir.
Basing these things off the value and versus if it's natural or synthetic or not. I think that was best said.
Awesome. So with this compound, this is not a natural compound. This is a synthetic compound that they've created in a lab based off of something in nature. A perfect analogy would be LSD, right? That you took something from nature and then altered it to be stable, to be active, and now we have LSD. And so there are people in the psychedelic community who say, well, mushrooms are preferable because that's natural.
Well, psilocybin, the studies that have been done with psilocybin, they've all been synthetic.
Exactly. So what I would encourage people hearing this is just because this compound was made in the lab does not mean that we should look at it warily. I mean, we should still put it through the same scientific, rigorous process that we put all other compounds, THC, CBD, and this compound included. And then based on, the merit, how efficient this thing is, how safe it is, all these other things, determine whether it's something that we should be using or not.
And I guess the argument to that some people on the other opposite, the people that are listening is that, okay, great. So the value is there, but that's after what, a year, 6 months of studying this. What about in 10 years? What about in 20 years? Because we don't know that. And that's where my mind goes oftentimes. It's like, let's talk about vaccines, like, okay, cool. This vaccine is shown to help with this, but what's it do to us in 10 years? 20 years.
So, I mean, with man, you had to wrap vaccines into this, didn't you? With any compound, and again, this goes back to the nature versus non-nature, right? We look at a compound like THC and we say, well, that's natural, and so it's good, and so we don't have to look at it through this framework. Well, the reality is that most people throughout human history probably didn't interact with THC a whole lot. And if they did, they definitely didn't interact with it at the levels that we're experiencing today. I mean, even 50 years ago, people were not consuming, they didn't even have the ability to consume as much THC as we do today with concentrates and edibles and all these things. So, so to say that, well, we don't know what this compound is going to do in 10 years. We don't know what the level of THC we're consuming is going to do to people in 10 years, right? All of this is a giant experiment. And so, I mean, that's what science is for, right? Well, first we determine whether this thing is safe now, whether it's effective now. And then we also have long-term follow-up studies to ensure that in the future, the benefits are still there and the side effects aren't there. And go ahead.
And that's what I love about science too, is that it's always evolving, right? There's there's always, and yes, I mean always, and I mean that, always going to be upcoming scientists and researchers that will take old studies that were done 30, 40, maybe even 100 years ago that have been like, okay, this is the way it is. And then they'll reinvestigate that information and they'll come to a new conclusion or they'll debunk it. And that's something that I personally just love about science in general.
Right. It has this cyclical nature where nothing's ever solved, right? Like everything's a theory. We know that this is the best interpretation based on the science we have now, but there's nothing that says that can't change in the future in science. And that's really the big difference between science and dogma, which is, religious dogma or whatever dogma it is, says this is the answer now and will be the answer forever into the future. Whereas science says this is the answer now, but we're open to being wrong. Actually, we assume that we're wrong, and we actively try to find that we're wrong. And if we can't find that we're wrong, well, hopefully someone else will find in the future that I'm wrong. That's really the goal of science.
Right. So going back on to Dr. Michellem's recent discovery, this EPM, I was reading that it could be an alternative to steroids and opioids.
Yeah, so that's what they're thinking, particularly for things like irritable bowel syndrome or irritable bowel disease. They compared this compound to prednisone, which is a steroid that we use right now, as well as a biological drug. I'm not sure which one they used. And they found that it was very similar in its ability to treat IBD. So the idea is that, like, cool, this first initial study seemed to be effective. Now we're going to put it through more rigorous testing. We're going to expand the things that we think it can treat. This isn't something that's going to hit the market, soon. I was listening to a podcast with the Rick Doblin, the guy who runs MAPS, and he was saying that, in order for a pharmaceutical company to take a compound from its inception to being approved in the marketplace is typically like it costs $1 billion and it takes like 10 years.
It takes like,
So this isn't something that's going to, be readily available, right? This isn't something that like Bake Bros could make in its lab and put in its products. This is something that's going to take a long time. And what I think is cool is that this highlights the future of medical cannabis.
Yeah, and the way that we've talked about this before, and it's a concern. It is, because it's a way for the company to protect the discovery, and but it also eliminates other people from being able to research it as well. That may be better equipped to research it, is they'll patent these cannabinoids, and that to me, I have a hard time accepting that, man. Like CBD. I mean, there's a patent. It was patented over 25 years ago, and it's like, what? This was patented in the 90s? Are you kidding me? This was patented in the 90s, and just recently it's become not more nationally exposed. It's like, I don't know, man. It's just I see that happening again.
Mm-hmm. The idea of a patent, and then this is a very rudimentary understanding, but is to protect someone's invention, right? Like I come up with this really cool invention, and then someone else figures it out. Maybe they take my invention and then take it to market faster than I was able to, based on whatever reason. And now they get all the glory and they get all the stuff, and it's like, well, that was screwed up. You totally stole my idea. So the idea of a patent is really to like protect your idea so that no one else can make money off of your hard-earned work. Now,
but when a pharmaceutical company patents a cannabinoid or a molecule and does nothing with it, the only reason they patent it is to prevent other people from using it. That's a problem.
Right. I agree. So, again, like with this, I mean, I hope that this pharmaceutical company takes this patent, does diligence by doing the research, and then puts out a product into the marketplace that, is effective and safe. And I also hope that, like Tesla, I think, does this. They opened up their patents. Like, anybody can take this technology and use it. Go ahead. We don't care.
Right. I love that.
Open sourcing, I think, is what that's called. I think that's a better model, at least at a certain point, right? Like, after we've figured out all the kinks and we know that we have a product we like, sure, go ahead. Let the best person win.
Right. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this little section of the podcast that we'll be adding. You can expect that with each and every episode moving forward is a nice little maybe 10-15 minute bit on what's going on. And now we're going to jump into the conversation, one that I love, and one that was originally sparked from Sam Harris's Waking Up app, is free will. And do we have it? Do we have free will? And I want to preface this conversation that's about to happen that some of you are not going to like this. It's going to be a very uncomfortable conversation. You are not going to agree. Derek and I are not going to agree with each other. And I just want to forewarn you and just be open-minded. And we would love to hear what you do have to say about this conversation. So feel free to email us, knowyourdosepodcast.com, or of course, any of our social medias, the Bake Bros Facebook or Know Your Dose Instagram, all work really well. I would actually encourage your feedback on this, but let's dive into it. So do we have free will? Let's begin with what is free will?
So free will is the idea that you are consciously in control of all the decisions that you make. If I choose right now to pick up this coffee mug next to me, well, I obviously had free will to do that, right? And so it's this idea that I am in control of my life. I am in control of the decisions I make, and so is everybody else. And on the surface, that seems right, right? Like I don't see anybody pulling my strings. There's nobody else in this room with me besides you. I'm free to do as I will. And so that's where, this feeling that we have free will goes. And this is something that goes back forever. I mean, there's this idea in religion that, one of the things that is unique about humans is we have agency. We have this free will that God ordained us with this ability to choose good from evil. And so, I mean, it's built right into the structure of our society, right? Like, you made a bad decision, you will be punished. You make a good decision, you will be rewarded. And that's because you chose those things, right? So that essentially is what free will is the idea that you make your own choices and that nothing is influencing those choices.
So why do we want to think that we have it? Why? What drives that?
So, let me give you an analogy or a story. So yesterday, as I was creating the outline for this podcast, my wife was sitting next to me on the couch, and I type in the show title, which is "Free Will is an Illusion." Immediately upon reading those words, she became very upset. No, it's not. You absolutely have a choice. Every decision you make is your choice. And I was like, whoa, you're getting super aggressive all of a sudden. And most people see this idea that way with abhorrence. It is just like, how could you even think of something else? You are crazy. Sam Harris talks about this in his lesson on this topic, that most people will hear what I'm about to say and go, you're insane. And the reason is because of the implications, right? If I say that you do not have free will, or that no one has free will, then what I'm saying is that somebody who commits, atrocious acts wasn't responsible for those acts, right? Our whole society is predicated on the idea that you made that decision. Let's say you murdered somebody, right? If I say you don't have free will, then it seems like I just absolved you of all responsibility because you didn't choose that, right? I said you didn't have free will. You weren't able to operate with a free understanding. And so that's very destabilizing to people. They don't want to believe that. And they also don't want to believe that they're not in charge of their own lives. Like, do you feel like you're not in charge of your own life? Or do you feel like you make your decisions subjectively? We do. And people don't like it when you treat them like they're not have free will, right?
Yeah.
It's an uncomfortable feeling. It's like, how dare you assume that I'm not in control of who I am? I'm absolutely in control of who I am.
And we all want to be, I speak for a lot of us, we want to be in control of who I am, and what I do and the choices that I make, especially the choices that I make. Your wife, for example, like, we are in control of the choices that we make. And it is, I do believe that it can be easy to get caught up in that. And there's a lot more, but with that, there's a lot more than what meets the eye with that, because this starts back, just go back to our previous episode on self-acceptance. It's kind of like that. I mean, this all starts from the beginning,
Right.
from when you're a child.
So a great a great example is Lila, my daughter, heard this discussion between me and my wife, and it was just me and her in another room after this conversation takes place, and she goes, "Dad, I just want to let you know that I do think we have free will. I do think we make our own choices."
She's
And
so cute.
she is. And I said, "Okay." I said, "Do you think if you had different parents who were different than me and Mom, that you would turn out different?" "Well, yeah." "So were you free to choose that?" "No." Okay, conversation's over. Right? It's like, I didn't choose to be born to the parents that I was born to, and I didn't choose the genetics that they had, and I didn't choose the environment that I grew up in, and I didn't choose the schools that I went to.
Right.
All of these things were not choices that I willingly made. Yet
Right.
they absolutely dictate the course of my life.
Correct.
Right? If
I think,
go ahead.
I was just saying, I think about that all the time, because like many out there, I come from a family of divorce, family of abuse, family of drug use. And I often wonder what would my life have been like had my parents stayed together, right? Would I have ended up, would I have ended up going and getting into wrestling as early as I did, right? Which is largely contributed to the circle of friends and family that I have right now, and to my success. It is, had my parents how about this? Had my parents not gotten divorced when I was 7 years old, I can confidently say I would not be here right now on this podcast with you and with the company of Bake Bros. There's no way. My dad's Muslim. Like, there's no way this a cannabis company would have flown. I would have been raised completely different, completely different. So there's just no way that would have existed. And it's like, that wasn't my choice.
It's like the butterfly effect. When I was a kid, I used to think about this all the time, and I would think, man, I wonder if I woke up today and I chose Captain Crunch versus Rice Krispie treats, if the course of my life would turn out differently. That seems so ridiculous, right? Like, well, the choice of a cereal, like, that wouldn't make any difference. But would it? Like, I don't know that. You know what I mean? and it's like that with every single thing that happens to you. That this conversation, somebody's listening to it, this could alter the course of the rest of their life, right?
Absolutely.
Were they free to choose that the information that came into their head changed the course of their life? No, because something down the line set them up to listen to this. And then something else set them up to hear the information the way they did. And then something else probably set them up to take action on that. And some people will hear this and go the opposite direction.
So I think you're one of the better people to discuss this with than just like, somebody who knows nothing about psychology, because you did go to school for psychology, or you majored in it. And so my question is, like, let's talk about somebody who does create or commit, let's just say a murder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Nothing. Oh man, it's this is where it gets uncomfortable, man.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, because I never want to justify someone's actions as to why they did it, because you commit the crime, you committed the crime,
right?
Okay, it's wrong. It is, but there are predisposed conditions that may have been the reason or an emphasis on or at least a variable as to why they committed that crime, and that is often overlooked, and just kind of like pushed to the side, because as humans we want immediate vindication, like we want immediate justification and vindication, like hang him, like I heard Sam Harris, I say hang him because I'm thinking of an elephant, this poor little elephant. Like I was watching Sam Harris on Joe Rogan, and he was talking about in like the early 1900s or maybe it was late 1800s, this elephant had escaped a circus, okay, and he like trampled over a few people. And this was like in the city of Baltimore, and the citizens were so angry at the elephant. They were like, they're so angry. They lynched this elephant by a crane. publicly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. I'm just gonna put I don't know what it's like to be an animal. I don't know what it's like to be an elephant, but I do know what it's like to be stuck in a cage, especially the last 4 months because of quarantine, and I don't like it. Okay, and so now I imagine what it must be like to be an elephant taken out of or put in captivity from whatever from wherever you came from, and you're put into a circus, and then you basically go crazy and you escape from the circus and you trample over people naturally because they get in the way of a 4-ton freaking animal,
Mm-hmm.
and but people don't want to look at or they don't want to look at the facts that, okay, this animal was taken into captivity, this animal was used for show purposes, this animal escaped and went on a belligerent rampage, and what nobody considers that. Instead, we say lynch him. Let's hang him publicly
Mm-hmm.
by a crane. An
Mm-hmm.
elephant, guys. Like, come
Right.
on.
Right.
Like, it's already bad enough that we're doing it to people, but it's like we go even further, and it's just disgusting is what it is. And but that aside, my purpose being in that is like we want immediate vindication, and I don't think we step back to really look into what may be the reason and why that these acts or crimes are committed.
So that example is fantastic because you give the backstory, and that's the backstory of why this elephant didn't have free will, right? It had all these decisions made for it along the way in its life experience. It didn't choose to be born wherever it was born so that it could be captive, and then put in a cage and all these things, and then it just left and it trampled a bunch of people, right? But the people on the outside who were affected by this go, screw that elephant, right? Like if my child was trampled by that elephant, it would be very difficult not to have some kind of feeling associated with that, right?
Right.
And so that's the charge that we experience when we're when you're talking about like someone who's murdered somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to like really understand it, you got to go again all the way back to development, and you have to realize that the way the way your brain is constructed is like this optimal learning machine. It's you're born with your genetics, which account for a certain percentage of who you are, but a lot of you is constructed by your experience, right? That's why our brain is plastic. It's adaptable so that we can learn things. That's why you can have so many variations to culture, so many variations to language. If I was born a baby, to my parents, and then I was taken to China and raised in China, I would learn Chinese. I wouldn't grow up speaking English.
Right.
It's because my mind would adapt to the language that I heard. And so just like that, your mind is shaped by your environment. The Buddha said, your perception shapes your reality. Well, your reality also shapes your perception. Like the inverse is true. And so you take this person, let's say they're a murderer. The first thing you got to understand is like, what was this person's upbringing like? Like, what were the experiences that led them to that moment? Because we know for a fact that there are certain genes that are responsible for psychopathic behavior.
Right.
Or sociopathic behavior,
or lack of genes.
right? And so, but what's interesting is that those genes we also know aren't activated unless you experience traumatic abuse as a child. So was that person free? No, they weren't.
No.
Right? Now that doesn't absolve that person of what they did. Right? We can't just let people like you murder someone. I can't just let you go around murdering people. Like that's not optimal. But what I can do is I can figure out what happened to you, and then try to ensure that doesn't happen in the future to somebody else. Right. So the way I think about it is that this free will argument is a really good for looking, and this is what Sam Harris talks about. It's like, it's good for looking at other people and other populations, right? Like this person, it helps me have a compassion because I could hate that person. Let's say somebody, killed somebody I love, right? I could have hate, so much hate, and everybody would feel justified, or everybody would feel okay with that justification.
Right.
I hate you because you killed my whatever. But that doesn't help me. That doesn't help that person. That doesn't help my society, right?
Or the next person, right? The society.
But if I understand that person didn't have free will, that there was circumstances in their life that led them to that moment, it allows me to have greater compassion and understanding for them. The way that I interact with them, like, I don't want to be your friend, I don't want you out in society, but I don't have to harbor all of these horrible feelings towards you. I don't have to stress myself out because of that person.
So
Does that make sense?
So, yeah, it sounds like personal responsibility, and it does play a very large role in our lives, and so it's. What are some of the steps that we can implement in order to address personal responsibility in our lives?
So one thing I think is important before we go any further is that the reason we're talking about this, I probably should have said this at the beginning, is this is part of personal development, right? Like part of this podcast is all about helping people level up in their lives. And so we've already talked about the benefits of self-love, self-acceptance. We've talked about stress and all these things. When you have this idea of free will in your mind and you apply it to other people, that relieves a lot of stress, right? There's so many things that happen in society now that I can look at through this perspective that helps me have understanding instead of hate and prejudice.
Right.
But as an individual, I can't look at my own life and just say, well, I'm just a product of my environment, and woe is me, and this person did that to me, and it caused me to do this and that. Like, you can
can't
look at it like
blame.
that. Go ahead.
It's not healthy to blame others.
Exactly, because it's not going to get you anywhere.
And I think you said it, like, okay, God forbid, let's just use myself as an example. I grew up in an abusive household, okay, or and let's say fortunately, I can say I'm not abusive. I'm not, but let's say I was married and I had children and I was abusive to my children. Okay. I could easily blame, well, my dad or my stepdad was abusive to me. That's why I'm doing it. But I think you said it doesn't absolve you from your actions. It's still wrong. It's
Right.
still wrong. It's just that we can address the reason why it's happened. And again, as you shared with Sam Harris, like we can look at others and maybe have a little bit more empathy for them, or how we can solve the problem for the rest of society moving forward. And maybe it's conversations like this, but to what you're saying right now is blaming others. I cannot. I have to take responsibility, full responsibility, and for what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, how I'm acting, no matter what, because you cannot blame others. It is not healthy for you. It is not healthy for others. There is nothing productive about blaming others whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
It is sheer just wasting time. It is a sheer waste of time.
It's assuming that other person had free will. So you take the example of, like, you have an abusive parent and then you blame them, right? You're assuming that person had free will. But oftentimes when we peel the curtain back, you realize, oh, well, their parent was abusive. They were exposed to things that I wasn't exposed to, right? And so they passed on that trauma. But the responsibility of the individual, the personal responsibility, is to go, this happened to me and it stops with me.
Fuck, that is so hard for so many people right now, and including myself. Like, that is so hard. Excuse my language, guys. That is so difficult to accept, and I know there's listeners out there too. That are probably agreeing, but that is a really difficult to accept, and I know in terms of spiritual healing, that's considered a blockage, right? Is not being able to take personal responsibility for your actions. Okay, your choices may not always be yours. Well, okay, in the context of this conversation, the choices are not yours, but your actions thereafter, I would argue, are. Okay, so okay, let's use an example of walking through the casino. Number 17 comes up, and I want to put $50 on 17 on roulette. Okay, the choice is there. Okay, the thought arose. The choice to do it is not. The action of doing it and placing it there. That's me. That's me.
So you probably don't have. So there's no free will in that, right? Like the experiences of your life led you to the moment to be in that casino, to see that number, and then to take the action to put the money down. Okay, but the problem is that as an individual, if you lost that money, you can't say, well, the reason I lost this money was because when I was 6 years old, blah 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 blah. It's like, no, you walked into that casino, you put the money. Or let me put it this way: not you, I walked into this casino. I put this money down. I made a mistake. There's a lot of reasons I made this mistake, but I have to accept that I made that mistake, and I have to put things in place to move my life forward. And that's really the second piece of personal responsibility is, first is stop blaming others, take responsibility. And the second is reflect on your habits and tendencies. Because if I don't know, right, like they talk about this in Alcoholics Anonymous, like the first step is acceptance. I am an alcoholic. I am whatever. And so when you stop blaming others and you take that responsibility, then you have to acknowledge, like, what are the patterns that I'm playing out in my life that aren't helpful? I can tell you one for me right now is it's really hard for me to acknowledge when I'm wrong, especially in
Totally.
my personal relationships, right? Like I don't want to admit to you that I'm wrong, but I have to look at that tendency, acknowledge that came from somewhere, and then actively, like every time that tendency starts to percolate up, go, ho, 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 I see what's happening. This pattern is playing out again, and it stops today. Right?
No, absolutely right, man. And also when it comes to reflecting on habits and tendencies, especially in like your everyday life. I mean, I guess I don't want to go too deep in this because it's the same. These are the steps that we're suggesting in personal in developing personal responsibility. But you have to. Jordan Peterson gives a couple good examples of like having to ask yourself some questions like, are you doing your best? Okay. Are you working your fullest capacity at school or work? Okay. Did like, if the answer is no, then stop doing what you're doing wrong and stop it today.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like stop it now. I am a victim of not doing that. Okay? I know that there are certain things wrong for me. Okay? And what do? I justify or I try and come up with a reason as to why it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And no, just stop doing it. Stop doing it. Break the pattern. We have to break the pattern. Right? It's Jocko Willink's extreme ownership. And extreme ownership is so frustrating because no matter what, man, no matter what, it is your fault. I'll give a good example of how extreme ownership can play into the business, into business in general. It's like, we work in the creative department, and there are oftentimes things that they go through a series of approvals. Okay, it's created by a designer, and then it goes, to the creative director, and then it goes through me, and then it goes through the rest of the leadership team, and then it gets sent off, right? And let's just say, I'm the final approval. I'm going to use you as an example, okay? Yeah. Let's just say I'm the final approval on something, okay? And it gets to me, and I catch an error, right? And I'm like, what the hell, man? Why am I seeing this? Like, there is clearly a mistake. And it's easy for you to blame any one of your team members because you've got a whole team underneath you. It's so easy for you to say, well, this person should have known to put this there, or this person did this or this. No, it is your fault. Mm-hmm. It is your fault this is happening, or this happened, period. Right? Just as if I were not to have caught it and move forward with releasing the content or the material or the design, and I didn't catch it, it is no longer your fault. Even though you didn't catch it, it is now my fault. I'm the one who released it.
And the power of that. So it's super. Would you agree this is super uncomfortable?
I hate this conversation.
Yeah, right. Like nobody likes this because it's like, hey, man, I didn't do it. But the reality is if you have an entire team doing that, right? Because so you take responsibility because you're beholden to someone else, right? You have to answer to somebody and say, hey, this got messed up and it passed through my eyes and it's my fault, right? Yep. And then you come and talk to me, and my answer should be, no, this is my fault because I should have caught it before it made it to you. And the person who's, further down the line should say, no, actually, it's my fault. And if every person along that chain takes personal responsibility, takes extreme ownership, you're going to see a lot more change than if everybody is trying to pass the buck down.
Totally.
Well, it wasn't me. It was Derek. Whoa, man. It wasn't me. It was so-and-so. It's like, that's not going to get us very far. We're not going to learn a whole lot. Nobody's going to improve. And so yeah, I mean, it's something that's super uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, like, that's what gives you actual freedom. Because now I've taken all of that blame from other people and taken it to myself and held that weight on my own. It's like Atlas, right? The idea of the man holding the world on his shoulders,
Yeah.
bearing
Yeah.
that burden. It's like, that's who
Yeah.
you are.
Right. So I think the next step 3 would be to take note when you mess up, right? Like that goes into extreme ownership. That goes that's it's a great segue because the definition of insanity is something happening over and over again and expecting a result,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you're that's easy for insanity to take place if you're not taking note of the problem, right? Because we're always in a rush. We're always go 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 go. And if we don't break the pattern,
Mm-hmm.
okay, if we don't reflect on the habit in this case would be rushing,
Mm-hmm.
okay, if we don't break that pattern and put something in place like a sticky right in front, like on my computer desk, like I got pink stickies for this and I got yellow stickies for this. They both have their own meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I know to look at these because they're right in front of my face every time I'm looking at my computer monitor, and they remind me slow down or proofread or whatever it may be. It's take note and recognize the failures that are happening, no matter how big or small, and whatever method that may be for you. And so I just named one, such as the sticky notes,
Mm-hmm.
but and that's just in my office area, okay? Because I spend a lot of time here. But let's say it's in. Let's say you want to get up earlier, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's something that's messing you up? Well, I usually wake up from my alarm, I pick up my phone and I hit snooze. Okay, take note of that. What am I going to do? I'm going to put my phone in the other room. I'm going to get an alarm clock that's not my phone. That's taking note. That action is taking note
Right.
of and making a change. It's breaking the pattern. Okay, so what do you have to say on that, and what are some of the things that you've done to kind of take note of some of the failures that you either have made or repeatedly make?
I think the biggest thing is not looking at the symptom, but looking at the disease. This is something that Zane, our marketing strategist on the team, said to me recently, and I thought, wow, that's a really powerful way to frame that. So, like, you take this example of the alarm clock, right? The symptom is me hitting the snooze button, right? The disease is the fact that I'm using my phone. It's right next to me, and it's really easy to hit the snooze button, right? So I take it out. But let's say the problem continues further. It's like, oh, well, obviously that was just another symptom. What's the disease? Maybe stop watching Netflix late into the night. Maybe stop consuming so much cannabis. Maybe go to bed earlier. There's all these things that it could be, but there is something that is causing this pattern to continue, right? With another example would be food. Like, I want to eat healthier, and yet I keep making bad decisions. Well, what's the disease? Well, I'm buying bad food. I'm putting it in my house. I'm putting it right there in front of me. Like, if I have a gallon of ice cream, there's only so much willpower that's going to say don't eat the ice cream before it just fails.
Totally.
You know what I mean? So, like, let's take a step back and reevaluate that behavior. And that's why it's so hard, because we're oftentimes looking at the wrong thing, and it goes all the way back to free will. It's like, oh, actually,
so what you're saying, we're not looking at the cause of it.
Right. So maybe I need to acknowledge that this actually is a pattern that started in childhood. Maybe my parents bought really crappy food and didn't talk to me about nutrition. And now I'm on this path of, like, not having discipline, not knowing what the right foods are. And so if I go all the way back, then I can actually do things to change that behavior into the future. It's very difficult, but when it's so important to take note of those failures and try to trace them back to their origin. Because if you don't treat the root, just like a weed in the yard, right? If I pull off the top, it's just going to keep growing back, growing back, growing back. But once I pull out that entire root, now it's not going to come back.
Well, vulnerability is a big thing. So what are some of the things that or just one, if you want to share, what's something that you have failed on and that you've taken note on, and what tool did you use to break that habit or break that pattern?
So Yeah, I was just thinking about this today. I had the realization recently that I was really, I used to be seen within my family and in my home as somebody who was very present with his kids and with his nieces and nephews. And I realized recently that that has changed. I am not present. I am not engaging. And I'm a shell of what I used to be. So I could blame a lot of things on that, right? Well, I had an infant, COVID happened, my job's more stressful, all these things. But at the end of the day, I'm the one making the decision. So I can't blame anybody else, right? So there's the first one. Don't blame anybody else. Take responsibility. Reflect on the habits and tendencies. Well, am I doing all the things to set me up for success to buffer against those other things? Do I have the right habits in place, or am I allowing negative habits to take hold? Am I sleeping enough? Am I exercising? Am I meditating? Okay, acknowledge those. Take note of failures. Well, what are the feelings or the mental framework that I'm in when I'm failing?
Mm.
Right? Oh,
Wait,
I'm stressed.
what are the questions or what are the variables? Like I just want to summarize this to make sure I'm on the same page. What are the questions or what are the variables in that current mindset when you're failing?
Right. So it's
Is that
like,
right?
yeah. So it's like looking at myself and going like, what's happening inside me? Right. It's like, oh, I felt depressed that day. And I felt stressed. And so I made the decision to, eat bad food and stay up late, which then affected the next day, right? Like there's the cycle right there. Oh, I got to
Yes.
stop it somewhere.
Right.
Right. So then I planned for the future. So I took note of the failure. I took note like, oh, okay, these are the emotions. This is the mental framework that's happening when these mistakes are being made. I'm now diagnosing the problem, and now I have to plan for the future. So I have to take responsibility. I have to say tonight, not tomorrow, tonight, I'm going to bed on time. I'm not going to watch TV. I'm not going to eat food past 8 o'clock. I'm going to wake up
Totally.
at 5:30. I'm going to get my meditation in. I'm going to get my workout in. I'm going to set me up for success. And that'll
Totally.
happen for a couple days, and then I'll fail again. And then it's just like meditation. It's always coming back, always starting over.
Right. And those three that you just listed right there are probably related to maybe 60, maybe 70% of any of the discipline or personal development problems that you are having in your life right now. And those were watching TV, staying up too late, eating before bed, or an overuse of some type of substance, whether it be alcohol, cannabis, whatever it may be. That's
Right.
that's your own vice or your own poison. And so address those three right there. I mean, those right there are that's called the compound effect. When you change those three, at least those three, man, you can have some big changes. I noticed that like watching, let's just say watching TV at night, like if I go, 9 o'clock, it's easy to turn the TV on at like 7:30 and now it's 9:30 and you're like, holy shit, I just watched, 3 hours worth. And you wake up and my eyes are burning. My eyes are like dry, they burn. Versus if I go a day or two without watching it, watching TV or Netflix or whatever it may be, dude, I wake up right out of bed. That's at least one variable component of it too. There are other things, but dude, it's a big difference.
I think the overarching theme in terms of personal responsibility is just like looking at how you mask what you're feeling. Right? Because those negative behaviors typically are trying to mask something else. Right? And then you avoid the things that you should be doing that will alleviate. It's this weird paradox. Again, probably because you don't have free will. So it's like, so it's acknowledging that and then taking steps to course correct.
But what you do have, what you do have the power over is putting a plan in motion, and that's what we're talking about right now. And that's step 4. All right. So let's recap real quick because we've been going for at least 15 minutes on this. So step 1, stop blaming others. Step 2, reflect on habits and tendencies. Step 3, take note of failures. Okay. And step 4, which we're going to cover now, plan for the future. So create a plan, put a plan in motion, get to work on time, stop interrupting people, like develop a plan. It's easy to talk. It's just like goal setting. It's easy to talk about goals. Okay. Right. But you need macro goals and you need micro goals. You need micro goals to get to the macro goals. Right? Because it's easy for me to set a goal and say, I want X amount in my bank account in 12 months. Okay, sweet goal, man. What are you going to do to get there? Well, and so maybe the micro goals are something that you set in place for every 3 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
For every quarter. You say, well, in 3 months I need to let's just say you're a fitness coach or whatever, and like I need to create and develop, I need to develop a curriculum for online programming, right? And then at the second micro goal, so 6 months in, I need to implement this. And on the third micro goal, 9 months into this, I need to have X amount of clients, right? And then on the fourth micro goal, or your year goal is okay, well, I have X amount of clients, I have my curriculum, I have my plan. How much am I generating in revenue? You get what I'm going with this. It's like you have to create micro goals to get to the macro goal. And so that's a part of the plan. We can't just say, all right, my plan is to create some goals. No. That is just creating goal. That's just goal setting. Like, now we need to plan the goals.
Right. I think so. If people are interested, we explain this in much greater detail in episode number 1, which is all about goal setting. But one of the things that I think is like the most important here is starting small. And I love Tim Ferriss gives this analogy, and I think this is so great. He's like, let's say you don't floss your teeth, right? Like, you should floss your teeth every day, but you just never do it. Start with flossing a tooth every day. You're just like, I'm going to floss one tooth, right? And then further down the road, maybe I floss the top part of my mouth and not the bottom part of my mouth. Eventually, you're just like, I might as well just do the whole thing. You know what I mean? And so, like, with working out, I mean, this is for me the one where I see people screw this up the most, which is, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, or I'm going to start going to the gym. You go once, you go all out, you totally screw yourself, you're super sore, and then you go, I never want to do that. That wasn't enjoyable. I'm never going back. It's like, maybe start with a walk.
Yeah.
Get active once a day, then maybe elevate your heart rate a little bit, and like,
or a great one is, say you wake up at 7 a.m. every day. Okay. Or, you know what? Say you wake up at 9 a.m. Okay. I'll tell you right now, that half the world is already way ahead of you, buddy. So it's time to wake up earlier. And you're like, damn, okay, I'm going to wake up at 5:30.
Good luck.
Good luck. Don't set your alarm clock. Hey, you know what? Some people are either 100% or none, but I would say most are not like that. And most need to take the approach in which you're speaking of, and I'm about to share as well. If you wake up at 9 o'clock and you want to get up at 5:30 a.m., okay, set your alarm clock to 8:45 for the next 3 days,
right?
For the next week. And then the following week, set it to 8:30, then set it to 8. Then set it to 7:45, then 7:30, then 7. Go in increments. Build yourself up to that. You have to titrate. You have to titrate whatever it is that you are. You're setting a foundation.
Exactly. So it's these incremental wins, because if I'm starting from a place where I don't have any wins, it's really hard to get inertia, right? That's not very motivating. Like, I have all these failures, but there's nothing to reference as a win. But so you start with one win. I just went for a walk. Like, oh, that's kind of motivating. I could do that tomorrow. And then I go for another one and another one. It's like, wow, dude, I'm like on a roll here. I've walked every day this week. I probably could do a little more. Yeah. Totally. And so it's just building in those positive reinforcements psychologically. And like you said, I mean, there's some people who are all or nothing. And if you're that person, you'll find very quickly that this isn't the approach for you. But I think most people, this is a tried and tested method that really does work when you're trying to build things in.
Definitely, man. Hey, let's get into the Q&A portion of the podcast. And question number 1 is, has potency increased in cannabis over the decades? If so, how do you think that will affect society? Ooh, man. Woo. Well, you're listening to it. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
Has potency increased? Yes, it has.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at cannabis in the wild, THC doesn't crack 5%. And I'm talking about like native species that they weren't cultivated by humans ever. Right. So, and then up until recently, I mean, the potency was 10%, 12% at the max. Like that was like the best stuff around. And now we're seeing strains at 30%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Like Valley Girl OG is upward of like 30%.
Right.
Woo, boy. Well, how's that affecting society?
Well, so there's a few things there. One is that people often, and like when I worked in a dispensary, this was the thing. Like, what has the highest THC percentage? Like, you get asked that so much. And what I would tell people, and this was just intuitively, you've probably experienced the same thing. It's like it's not about the THC percentage. There are strains that are 12 percenters that hit just as hard, or if not harder, than some that are 25 plus. So it's like, what's up with that, right? Well, now there's actual data to back that up. They just did a study where they gave people 12% and they gave people, I think it was like 25+%. And they found that both people experience very similar levels of intoxication.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily the THC percentage. But to your question, like,
well, what are the other variables? Is
terpenes, minor cannabinoids, flavonoids.
Okay.
There's so many compounds in this plant that we're just beginning to understand what's mediating all those effects, right?
Yes. Okay. So how do we think that this will affect society? I want to be sure to answer this individual's question.
What are your thoughts before I go?
Dude, it's a double-bladed sword. Well, we've got recreational cannabis now. Okay. Well, that's more so than just cannabis use. That has nothing to do with the increased potency of cannabis. How will this affect society? I believe that by increased potency, one thing that has come from this is, and I've experienced this firsthand with people near and dear to me, as well as patients. Many of Bake Bros patients is people sharing their story on being able to transition from certain pharmaceuticals such as opiates over to cannabis. And I don't believe that would have been possible with 5% THC cannabis, back in the day. The fact that we're able to take a plant and concentrate it into something such as distillate hash oil, which is upward of 90%, sometimes more. I think that has given us the opportunity to create the very products that we have right here, right now, within our business. That help others achieve the relief that they're trying to get.
I love you, bud. I'm probably not going to be very popular with this show after I say what I'm about to say, and I mean this from the most sincere place in my heart, and I hope that people know that I love the cannabis plant, and I think that THC is an incredibly valuable tool, and I think that we have been really misguided in our assumptions about what is optimal with THC and how effective it is at large doses, specifically because there's more and more research that comes out. Like, again, I don't pretend to have seen every study that's been done on THC and pain relief, but the ones I have read and the reviews that I've looked at consistently show that low to moderate levels of THC are better at treating pain than high levels of THC. And I think part of the problem is that there's a difference between psychological relief and physiological relief, right? And I also don't think that we've really mapped out like what is the best way to transition somebody or how to treat cannabis or how to treat pain best with cannabis, right? Like if you start taking 100 milligrams, you never had the opportunity to try 5.
Right.
And to see what that did over the long haul, right? And maybe those results would be better over the long term because once your tolerance goes up, it can only go up. So there's an element of that I'm not sold on the idea that more is better. I think that there may be I just think there's something there based on the research. There was a study done in Israel recently where they found that ultra low doses, subperpetual doses, were more effective at treating pain than bigger doses. So
interesting.
There's something there. Again, I don't have all the answers, but that's just my thought process. The second thing is there has been a lot of studies, and again, this isn't conclusive, so this is just my interpretation and my opinion. But it seems like the more you increase the level of THC, the more prevalence you have of negative outcomes, particularly for mental health, right?
Yeah.
So like you could imagine someone, cannabis is biphasic, right? So at low doses, it helps anxiety. At high doses, it increases anxiety. So as we increase the concentration, we could potentially exacerbate mental health problems that we were intending to actually treat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's people on the other hand that would say, well, hey, man, because it's more concentrated, you just take less. Okay, I don't know which approach is correct, but I do know that, like, if I have a bazooka as opposed to a revolver, like I may shoot the guy who's attacking me with the pistol, but if I use the bazooka, I'm going to blow him up in then half a square mile. You get the point I'm making?
Yeah.
So I think that increasing the THC percentage is a risky experiment, and it is what it is. It's already here, but we should be cautious. We should use a critical eye.
So it sounds like we have somebody interested in personal development. How would my process of growth be affected if I went easier on myself? Oh man, this would have been nice. This would have been nice to have Thomas on here to answer this one, because he is balls to the wall, right? He's one of those 100%ers. Like, I'm in it, and I, on the other hand, am like, hey, go a little bit easier on yourself, bud. Don't beat yourself up. Well, you probably wouldn't be an asshole. No, okay, just joking. I don't know who you are. I don't know what your tendencies are. I don't know what your stress levels are. So there are so many variables to that, or so many variables to the response that you're about to get. And if you're asking this question, I'm going to go ahead and just assume that you're somebody who is hard on yourself, right? And somebody who is overstressed, right? And so, what does going easier on yourself look like? Well, let's just say you're the type of person that has to, if you don't, like, you have to work every single day, X amount of hours. And if you don't, you're just going to beat yourself up. You're going to beat yourself up. Well, what's happening in my perspective from this is, with that mentality and that mindset, sure, you're getting the work done, but what's the quality of the work like? Right? What is the quality of the conversation, the quality of the interactions, the quality of the research, the quality of the documentation, just the overall quality of the work? What is that quality when you are working 7 days a week, 15 hours a day, and you think that you're getting, shit done because you're just grinding? What happens if, let's say, you take you take 2 days out of that week? It doesn't have to be the weekend, right? It could be a Tuesday and Thursday, for all I care, or Tuesday and Saturday. But let's say you break that pattern of everyday hustle and bustle, and you incorporate 2 days worth of rest and recovery. Okay, some R&R for yourself, some taking it easier on yourself, right? What happens to the quality of that work when you return back to work? Well, I can attest firsthand that it increases. You're sharper, you're more focused. The desire to want to do it is stronger, right? So those are some of the things that I can personally attest for when you do take it, quote, easier, unquote, on yourself. Right? Derek, what do you have to say?
So there's something called the stress paradox, where a certain amount of stress is good. And then once you tip over the line, now your productivity starts to be hindered because of the stress you're experiencing, right? So a little stress is great for personal development, for growth. A lot of stress is not so good. Typically, if you're on the growth path, you're already motivating yourself. You're already driven. If you then in turn add the extra weight or extra stress of being hard on yourself, right? By calling yourself an idiot when you mess up, being super negative, like, you are literally just making your life, you're trying to push a boulder uphill. Like, it's just like you're going nowhere. And you're spinning your wheels thinking you're making yourself more productive and a better person, but you're actually damaging yourself in the process. Like, you're not going to have any longevity. You're going to burn out eventually. You're going to snap. Something's going to happen. And typically, I feel that comes from a place of not being super confident in yourself. You feel like you have to overcompensate by being really hard on yourself or pushing yourself beyond what is reasonable. This is an idea that I got from a book that I'm reading right now called Relentless by Tim Grover. And he was the trainer, the athletic trainer for Dwayne Wade, for Michael Jordan. And he talks about the mindset of these athletes. And one of the analogies he gave, dude, was so perfect. He was like, somebody who is relentless, unstoppable, right? That's what we're trying to achieve as in our personal growth pursuits. That person's not concerned with anything that's happening around them. They are 100% confident in their ability to execute, to be the person that puts it all on the line on me. And he says, when you find yourself getting frustrated, getting mad, getting upset, whether it's at someone else or yourself, you're not relentless. You're not unstoppable at that point because you're feeling some type of way, and that's projecting outward, right? Now I'm being hard on myself. I'm being more critical of others. So it's this idea that like I have to stop those behaviors. Again, like stop blaming others. Well, stop pointing that finger at yourself, being overly critical. Take ownership without being mean to yourself and move forward. Right. So it's like, I guess the distinction is like, don't be mean to yourself. It doesn't mean you have to be easier, but just don't be mean.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's a very good distinction. And I hope that answered your question. That wraps it up for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Or this week's episode, I should say. We always truly appreciate it. We're seeing our audience grow and grow, which is really exciting. That means that you're sharing it with your friends and family. And I encourage you to continue, please. If at any point in time you find something helpful here, to go ahead and just share it. Tag a friend, tag a family member. Ratings and reviews always help. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, and we will talk to you next week. Bye. Hey, everybody. Quick disclaimer. The Know Your Dose podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only. Let's be real. None of us are doctors. Our content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical or public health advice. Please be smart and always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare professional with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Seriously, never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast. That would just be insane.